Okay, so you're all very welcome back again to the continuation of the Lightroom session. So the image I have open here in front of me is an image that Finbar sent me. Some time ago in the club, Finbar and myself spoke about doing a Lightroom session or a developing session, particularly in monochrome. And I said to Finbar when I was going to do a session, I would ask him for a copy of his image. Now, this image was taken during a club outing to Kerry maybe 2 years ago or thereabouts. So the image is open here in front of us. So the first thing I'm going to do to this image is I am going to rotate it a little bit to get the horizon level. So I come over here to this on the right hand panel here, and I press it, and it opens up another little sub panel here, and I'm just going to hit auto here on the right hand side, and it should do an auto correction. On an image like this, it's fine to do that because it has a good solid horizon line to work with. Sometimes it's a bit more difficult. So when it's finished, you just press done down here on the right hand side just below the image, and it fixes the image to that. Now I will always check as well to make sure that that's level, so I'll just zoom into that. So in Lightroom, as you can see, if I bring it up into the sky here, the white part of the sky, it's always set up so that you can zoom in straight away. Then it gives you a hand, and you can just move around the image like this, or you can come over to the left hand panel here and use this to go around to a particular place within the image. So what I'm looking for here now is I'm looking at this line here, and I'm going to move the image up until it comes to the top of the screen, and just to make sure that that line is horizontal going across. So that's pretty much perfect really, so no issues there. The other way you can zoom in and out is if you use the Z on your keyboard. Just hit Z and it takes you back out. Use Z again and it takes you back in. Some people find it easier to just use the keyboard shortcuts. So there's lots of ways. It's whatever way it suits you is the important thing really. See that the focus is okay here on the stick. So if I zoom back out again, we can see here just under the histogram that it's shot at ISO 100, it's shot at 64mm, and it's at f.6 and at 16 seconds. So there may have been a little bit of movement in the stick. For 16 seconds it's maybe not as pin sharp as you would like it to be, but still it's good enough, and for the purpose of this exercise we'll work away on that. That's fine. So it's out of focus in the horizon, and it's out of focus here in the foreground. So it's focused really. This is where the focus of the image is. So what we want to end up with here is an image that's processed, and that the focus of light is going to be on a sort of an elliptical shape around the image like this, and everything else is slightly darker going out from that. So we will try and bring in the colour of the sand a little bit. Even though it's out of focus, we won't be able to do much with it, but just will be a colour tone that we'll be working on. So okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to come down to my lens correction, and I'm going to put on the remove chromatic aberration, and I'm going to check this box here for the profile correction. So just watch the screen very carefully here now, and you should see something happening. Okay, so that made just a slight difference to the screen. So it tells me here, and the profile was Adobe. So that's all fine. We'll leave that. Sometimes if your lens is causing a bit of vignetting around the edge, you'll be able to correct that here as well by just pulling the slider across, but we'll just set it, we'll set it now just back to 0 again, and we let it. So any of these panels, if you want to set your slider back to 0, you just double click on the word here and it brings it back in. So the first thing I'm going to do with this now is I'm going to right click with the mouse on this, brings up this menu here, and I'm going to come down to create a virtual copy. So this now is my virtual copy, and this is what I'm going to be working on. So this now is my virtual copy, and this is what I'm going to be working on. Lightroom is very clever actually in this regard, because if you were doing this in Photoshop now, you'd have to copy the file and create another file of it, thereby using up more space on your disk. What Lightroom does is a virtual copy, so it's not copying the file, it's just using the base file, the information of the base file, as a reference, and overlaying it on top of the original file. So you're not using up a lot of disk space every time you make a virtual copy of the file, which is very, very handy actually. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to concentrate here now on processing this file. So immediately the first thing I would say here is that this file is exposed, reducing the exposure slightly, and as you can see, as we reduce the exposure, we're bringing the U shape of the histogram more into the center. So we're expanding the tones slightly, or we're producing more mid-tones, I suppose, is what we're doing technically here. So I might reduce it by maybe 0.71 of a stop, thereabouts. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the whites here, and I'm going to expand the whites, and then after that I'm going to expand the blacks. So if you look at the histogram here, I'm going to expand the whites out here to the edge until it begins to, if you keep an eye on this little box here, you'll see this going red, or it might go red on the screen as well. And similarly with the blacks, I'm going to expand the blacks. So to do that on the keyboard, you hit Alt with your finger and just hit this button here on the white, and you expand it out. You keep moving until see the whites are beginning to they're beginning to bleed here now. So that's a little bit too much. So a little bit is no harm really, tiny little bit. So about there, and I'd stop, and then I go to the blacks and I do the same. So I'm hitting Alt on the keyboard, and I'm hitting this with the mouse, and I'm expanding it over to the left. And again, now it's no harm to introduce a little bit of black clipping here on the on the image. So that's the whites and blacks now expanded out there. I'm just going to have a look at this expanded out there. I'm just going to have a look at this now, but I won't be leaving it like this. I just want to have a look at the, you can see on the stick itself now, when you expand out the shadows here, you can see the detail. If we just zoom into the stick and bring the shadows, so you can see the detail there on the stick pretty good. So by exposing to the right, you can pull the shadows quite a bit. So if Finbar hadn't exposed this image to the right and you had to just bring the shadows up, you would be introducing a lot of noise into the image. So it's always very good and worthwhile to expose to the right and bring the exposure down slightly if you have to then when you're creating your image. So so my slider was here. So as I say, any of these sliders will click on the word. the appropriate word there, and that will do it for you. So now, so what else am I going to do with this image? I'm going to come down here to the tone curve, and I'm going to reduce, just pull down the blacks a little bit here, maybe not too much, and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to pull up my whites a little bit like that. Just again, be careful here that you're not producing too much burning. So you can see the way it's adjusted these automatically now itself here. So I'm going to go back up here again, and I'm just going to reduce down the highlights a little bit here on the overall image. Right, so we have, if we look up here at the histogram now, we have nothing burning in the whites here. We have nothing burning in the whites here. We have slight over pull on the blacks here, but we'll be dealing with that later, and I'll show you how we'll be dealing with that. We'll probably use a luminosity mask to do that. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the HLS and color slider here. It's actually set at the color slider at the moment. Saturation is picked out here. So if you don't know what color range you're working with, you just pick up this fella here with your mouse, come onto your image, and you come down to here, and now you can see that there's yellows. If you look over here, there's yellows on the right hand side, there's yellows, and anything else, any other color in it? Okay, no, so it's yellows. So if we go back up to the yellow slider, and if we increase it a little bit like this, so we have yellows there. So I think that's quite nice. We'll have a look at what other colors are involved here. So I'll pick up that again and come out into the image. So there's blues, and I think there might be greens somewhere as well in it. Well, there's certainly blues. So I'm going to come down to the blues, and I'm going to reduce the blues a little bit. Because everything is out of focus here in the distance and in the foreground a little bit as well, it's nicer to make this a sort of a very dreamy image. You don't want much detail back here because there's a big wave coming in here, and you just want to subdue that a little bit. Now I'm going to go into the luminance of the colors, and I'm going to work again on the yellow. So that's brightening it. I might darken it a little bit there. So I might leave it about there. I'm going to go to the blues, and I'm going to more brightness there into the blues again, because I don't want them to be overpowering. And we'll want to introduce a little bit of depth here into this image now, a little bit of perspective, I suppose, to give it a bit of depth perception. So this is very nice here in the background, the headland here and the island here. So I'll show you how we'll bring those out a little bit in a moment. But for the moment now, we're going to just concentrate on the sky. So I'm going to pick up the graduation filter here. I'm going to pick up the graduation filter here. And I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to drag this down. Now, as you can see, it's very difficult to keep this perpendicular or horizontal as you're bringing it down. Now you will get used to it eventually. Sometimes you mightn't want to. In this case, I want to bring it down to the horizon line here very clearly. So the way you do that is you just hit the key here on the keyboard just above Control, the up key, I suppose you'd call it. I'm not sure what you'd call it, but yeah, that key just above the Control key, and it keeps everything, so you can't, no matter what you do with it now, you can't twist it about. So bring it down to the horizon just like that. It's also a good check as well to make sure that you're just checking to see that your horizon is horizontal. So I leave it go now. Oops, what did I do there? Okay, so I just undid it there, so for a moment. So I'm going to go back into it again. Beg your pardon, no. I'm going to go back into it again. Beg your pardon, no. pull it down to here, leave it go, and there it is. Now, so in the effects panel here, if you want to bring anything back to 0, you can bring it back by just coming to it and double clicking on it. But there's a couple of items here that are adjusted already, so if you just come up to the effect here within the panel and double click on that, it automatically sets everything at 0. So now this is still live, the graduation here, and this is the, if you come up to the center, it will show you the mask that's on it. So I have it set to green in my case here. The other way you can see it is if you just press O, which is between the I and the P and the keyboard, that brings up your mask here. There's also another way of doing it down here, show select mask overlay as well. I tend to use the letter O, it's quicker. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the mask here now, and I'm going to come down over to the right hand side of the panel here, and I'm going to reduce my highlights. Sometimes that's enough to just darken it a little bit. I'm going to have a look at the exposure and just bring it down ever so slightly, maybe about 0.17 thereabouts, and leave it at that. So that's good enough now. Now if you look at the mask, if I put on the O again, it's brought that into the water a little bit as well, and that's fine. That's just graduated down along. So to this line of the mask here, this is the full mask, and then below that it graduates the mask. So okay, so I'm going to leave that for the moment, and now I'm going to work on the bit of a trunk of a tree here itself. So we're going to use Arrange Mask. So Arrange Mask is something that's new enough to LightRoom. I think it was only introduced in the last upload or thereabouts, so it's relatively new. So I'm going to use an Arrange Mask. Will work with any of these. It will work with a graduated filter, it will work with a radial filter, and it will work with a brush. So we're going to use a radial filter in this case. So this is the way the radial filter works. So come out onto the screen and you just click it with the left mouse button screen, and you just click it with the left mouse button and pull it out to wherever. You can change it to whatever you want it to be, the shape of it. So I'm going to put it down over the branch of the tree and the shadow. So just leave it go and it will settle in at that itself. Now you have various handles on this, so if you pick the handle here, it changes it in both directions here about the axis, the center axis, and similarly here that will change it about a center axis as well. If you hit the Alt key and come to this, you just change one edge of it. This is something that Mara Sweeney taught me in Scotland actually when we were doing a processing session one evening. Very, very handy for just bringing it in, which is what I want to do. You have a nice bit of coverage there now just on the trunk of the tree itself. So I'll come over here on the right hand side of the panel to Range Mask. By default all these masks are off, so you've got to switch it on. So you have a choice of color or luminosity. I tend to use luminosity most of the time. There are occasions I will use color, but I find luminosity is the one I generally go to. So go to luminosity. That in turn brings up a little sub panel down here now as well. So here we are at Range Mask, set at luminosity. This is a selector, so I'll click on the selector and bring it out here and bring it onto the black area here that I want to work on. Now to see the mask that it's produced, just hit O again, the letter that it's produced, just hit O again, the letter O, and this shows you what it's actually picked. This is the range that it's picked to and from. So if you slide it back, you can see that it's going out to the whiter areas, and as you come back in to the blacks, it's concentrating more on the blacks. The smooth is automatically set at 50. If you go right back out this way, you see you can see like a feather really. You can see more of it affected, but we don't want to do that. We want less affected. We just want the branch of the tree affected really. So I'll bring that way down there to somewhere like there. Okay, so I think we're ready to start making our adjustments now. So that's that isolated within the scene. So you come back up to here. I'm going to double click on effect because I want all these set at to be neutralized. Now I'm going to come up to my zoom. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to pull my shadows here in this panel. I'm going to, before I do that, I'm going to switch off my mask overlay because you won't be able to see through the green. So I'm going to pull my shadows a little bit here, maybe not too much. I might pull the exposure ever so slightly. Be very careful with these sort of things because you can overdo them in an instant. I might have a look at the contrast here. Might give it a small bit of contrast, and once you get the contrast right, again, don't do too much on it. I'm going to come down to the highlight, and I'm going to pull that down, a little bit. So I might come to clarity and just pull the clarity slider up a little bit. Again, now never too much of any of these things because they'll just be overdone. Okay, so I think that's okay. So I'll press done and I'll zoom out from that, and now you can see the detail of that is much better. So a much better general image all round. So this, some people might say, look, that's a little bit distracting here because we don't need it. If this is going to be the focus of the image, this may be a little bit distracting. So I would normally do this, I suppose I would bring this into Photoshop to get rid of this actually, but there is a tool here called spot removal, in LightRoom. It's very good for some things. When it works, it's great, but if it doesn't work, it's not brilliant by any means. Spot removal just does as it says. It was originally just worked as a spot like that, and did away with something. It will automatically pick what it finds to be the nearest to it. I'm going to say done to that. Now, if, for instance, in Lightroom you do something and you don't, you want to go back, you come over here to the left-hand panel and you go back to the last thing. So that was the add spot removal. Just come back to the update clarity adjustment and it will put back the where you left. Or Control Z as well on the keyboard will do exactly the same thing. So they introduced this. They put a little bit of a functionality on this some time ago, and you can see on the keyboard here, I'm just using the bracket on the keyboard here next to the letter P. So one side makes it smaller and the other makes it bigger. So you can set your size there. You can also set it up here on the right hand panel with the size and the feather and the opacity as well. So I'm going to let the opacity and the feather set at 100, and I'm going to leave the size there as it is, and I'm going to just click just outside it here with the mouse, and I'm going to draw the mouse across like that. So it gives you a linear thing. That's not a great pick, is it? So maybe something like this. Maybe bring it like that. So yeah, something like that. perhaps is what you want. So as I say, it's not brilliant by any means, and I would generally do that in Photoshop, but it's fine for this exercise. The other thing I want to do now is I'm going to work on, I suppose, concentrating the eye on the center of the image here. So to do that, I'm going to put down a graduation here on the send, and I'm going to darken it. This time I don't want it to be straight across. I'm going to use it along the line of the interface between the sand and the water, so I'm going to just leave it like that. I'm going to come back up to effects, and I'm going to double click it to bring everything back to 0 for this. I'm going to bring down the highlights, and I'm going to bring down the exposure a little bit like that. So maybe something like that. For the moment will do fine. I'm going to press done to accept that. The radial filter here again, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just draw it out like this, because this now is, we want to work on this. I'm going to bring that side of it down a little bit like that. I'm going to bring this in a little bit here, and I'm going to leave the rest of it alone. So I'm going to, okay, I'm going to bring that back. Right, so I'm going to try and brighten this area a little bit. I'm going to press on effects again here so that everything is neutralized. So I'm going to want to brighten this area a little bit. So I'm going to feather this out to 100% probably as well, to get a better graduation of the light. So okay, so that's everything here now is, so that's everything here now is going to be very, very subtle. So you don't want a huge change in tones here. I'm going to come down to the dehaze, and I'm going to maybe put in a bit of minus dehaze. There's minus dehaze and there's plus dehaze. Okay, so just ever so slightly I'm going to bring that down, and I'm going to press done. Now I'm going to use my brush here. I'm going to set effects everything to 0. I'm going to come down to clarity, and I'm going to pull the clarity way down. I have a brush selected, so what I want to do here, I want to make my brush bigger, and I want to take the clarity out of this. So I want to make this a bit dreamier looking. So take the detail out of that. There really is what I'm doing. So clarity can work in both ways. You can add clarity or you can reduce clarity. So I'm going to take the texture down as well a little bit there. Maybe take the clarity all the way down, and I'm going to accept that. So now you took the, you had little sections here where the eye may have been drawn to as well, so they're now gone. So now the last thing I want to do, second last thing maybe, is I want to work on these here. So again, I'm going to come up to a brush. I'm going to use a brush. I'm going to set my effects to 0. I'm going to use the dehaze, and I'm going to put it up to about 25 for the moment. I leave auto mask on, and I'm going to make my brush a little smaller here, and I'm going to paint on here around the profile of this island like this. Now you have auto mask on, so it should pretty much pick a fairly good clean line around the intersection of the island and the sky itself. So I might make the mask fill all that area, so I made the picker there a little bigger just to fill that in quicker. And now if I go over to here and just do this, I'm doing this very quickly now, but if you were doing it in for yourself at home on an image, you do this much slower, making sure that you have everything picked. So now there's that's dark and a little bit obviously too dark. So if I set it at 0 again, just double click on dehaze. So that's what we had. So I just want to, just maybe about there, maybe about 9 or so, and that's perfect. So it just gives the image a little bit of depth, really. And lastly, what I'm going to do on this image, I'm going to come all the way down to effects, and the vignette here, I'm just going to pull the amount slider here to the left a little bit. So I'm going to just darken the edges a little bit, like that. Again, now this is something you have to play with and not overdo it again. And I think that's enough. I won't go into the midpoints, roundness, feather. You can, in your own time, you can look at all those yourself, but that's how you do it. So I think that's our finished image, guys. If we look at where we came from, come down to the double Y's here. So that was the before image on the left, and this was the after. Of course, that was before, after correcting the horizon line and things like that. So that's adjusted there now. So I'm going to leave it at that. We'll go back to that view. I'm going to leave it at that.